Our next History of Medical Cannabis section will focus on the recent legalization landscape in the United States. In 1972, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, known as NORML, filed an administrative petition with the Drug Enforcement Agency to reclassify marijuana on the Controlled Substances Act so that physicians could legally prescribe it. Federal authorities refused to accept the petition until 14 years later. Yes, you heard that correctly. 14 years later, when the courts finally ordered the DEA to do so. In 1986, public hearings were finally held, and in 1988, Judge Francis Young ruled that, quote, marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. By any measure of rational analysis, marijuana can be safely used within a supervised routine of medical care. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for DEA to continue to stand between those sufferers and the benefits of this substance in light of the evidence in this record, unquote. Then DEA Administrator John Lawn rejected Judge Young's ruling, a decision which was later upheld in a 1994 Court of Appeals hearing, meaning cannabis remains Schedule I federally to this day. However, this ruling represented a tidal shift in the way cannabis was perceived and judged both in society and by state governments. The National Institute on Drug Abuse began to supply 7 patients with legal medical cannabis after a lawsuit by the Department of Health and Human Services validated the investigational new drug applications filed for these patients by their physicians. To clarify, an investigational new drug application is based on a loophole which allows for the dispensing of investigational new drugs as an exception for patients who are unable to qualify for clinical studies. What this means is that the government legally acknowledged and supplied patients with medical cannabis for medical purposes, while cannabis itself remained a Schedule I substance with no medical benefit. The Compassionate Investigational New Drug Program was suspended in June of 1991 after the number of applications surged in response to the growing AIDS epidemic and was officially terminated in 1992. In 1980, a synthetic version of THC was developed under the brand name Marinol as an anti-nausea medication for cancer patients. Marinol was tested in a study run by the National Cancer Institute on patients in San Francisco, and simultaneously, studies were run comparing Marinol against actual smoked cannabis across 6 other states. The state study found that patients overwhelmingly preferred smoked cannabis to the synthetic compound, and yet, because the National Cancer Institute research showed that patients responded to Marinol, the government ignored the findings from the state studies and instead gave Marinol the green light. The government later sold its patent on Marinol to the drug company Unimed, which received FDA approval in 1992, and Marinol became available to patients as a Schedule II prescription medication. In 1996, voters in California passed Proposition 215, which permitted patients and their primary caregivers to possess and cultivate cannabis for the treatment of AIDS, cancer, muscular spasticity, migraines, and several other disorders with a physician's recommendation. It was approved by 56% of voters and became effective in November 1996, making California the first state to have a legalized medical marijuana program. Alaska, Oregon, and Washington became the next 3 states to legalize medical marijuana in 1998. The United States Court of Appeals issued a ruling in Conant v. Walters, which stated that the federal government cannot investigate or revoke a physician's license based upon their recommending medical cannabis to patients. This ruling opened the door to many more clinicians feeling comfortable with adopting medical cannabis as part of their practice. The 2003 United States government patent on the use of cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants once again indicates a clear conflict of policy in which the government itself holds a patent on the medicinal use of a substance for which it has scheduled as having no known medical benefits. The 2009 announcement by U.S. Attorney General is known as the Ogden Memo and represented a shift in policy in which the Department of Justice acknowledged that its resources would be better spent on endeavors other than prosecuting individuals with cancer or other illnesses who are using medical cannabis in accordance with state laws. In 2012, Colorado and Washington voters passed the first initiatives legalizing the use of recreational cannabis. The 2013 Cole Memo was an update to the U.S. Department of Justice federal marijuana enforcement policy, which reinforced that the Department of Justice was deferring to the individual states to enforce their own narcotics laws and would defer their rights to challenge states with legalization laws in place. In 2018, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded the Cole Memo. But this was largely a symbolic gesture, as the power to prosecute remains in the hands of state attorneys. In 2018, Epidiolex, a cannabis-derived CBD medication for rare pediatric epilepsy disorders, was approved as a Schedule V substance by the Food and Drug Administration. Again, this is in direct conflict with the Schedule I designation of the plant the medication is derived from. But still, Epidiolex represents a significant shift toward validating the medicinal benefits of cannabis-derived therapeutic compounds. As of the fourth quarter of 2019, 2/3 of the United States have approved medical cannabis in some form, and a sea change is taking place in the medical communities in regards to the potential applications of the medicinal properties of cannabis as more studies are performed and real clinical data begins to emerge. In summary, cannabis has been used medicinally for over 5,000 years. Cannabis medicines were widely used in the United States in the early 19th century after medical cannabis was introduced largely through the work of Sir William Brooke O'Shaughnessy. The prohibition of cannabis was not based on scientific research or medical evidence, but was rather the result of racial prejudice and the protection of private corporate interests. The recent state-led legalization of cannabis for medical and recreational use has led to a shift in the perception of cannabis in the United States. This concludes the History of Medical Cannabis Learning Module. Thank you for joining us.